The atmosphere in Terminal C at Chicago O'Hare hummed with the quiet din of travelers, punctuated by periodic boarding calls. At Gate C-19, however, the mood abruptly changed, becoming charged with an unspoken tension, as though the air itself had grown heavy. From behind the counter emerged Captain Alan Reynolds, immaculate in his crisp uniform, his gaze locked on something that caused his jaw to tighten. "That dog," he declared, his voice slicing through the relative quiet of the gate area, "will not be flying on my plane." Instantly, every head in the area turned. In the middle of the crowd stood 8-year-old Leah Jensen. Her oversized noise-canceling headphones were askew on her small head, while one hand was buried deep in the thick fur of a German shepherd wearing a service vest. The dog, Bear, stood steadfastly, composed yet watchful, his body a gentle, reassuring pressure against the girl's leg. Leah did not raise her head or utter a word, but her fingers clenched, digging into Bear's coat as a tremor started in her body. Her father, Evan Jensen, stepped forward. He had the look of a schoolteacher, not a man anticipating a fight. His eyes were calm behind wire-rimmed glasses, and his shoulders were squared, belying the resolve burning within him. "Captain," he began, his voice even. "This is Bear, my daughter's certified medical service dog. All the required documentation is in order, and we have adhered to every airline regulation." "Your paperwork is irrelevant to me," Reynolds retorted, cutting him off. "My responsibility is the safety of every person on this flight, and that creature," he motioned toward Bear without glancing at Leah, "represents a liability I will not accept." Around them, the crowd of passengers grew tense. Some began filming with their phones, others exchanged whispers. None of them could have known that this standoff would influence more than just a boarding schedule. It was a moment that would alter everything. Leah Jensen had not always been so silent. Evan's old phone held grainy home videos of a curly-haired toddler joyfully spinning in the backyard, improvising songs about butterflies and the shapes she saw in the clouds. She had once been a torrent of words, posing 1,000 questions about everything, pointing at the sky and creating a new language to describe what she saw. That all changed with the diagnosis. When she was 4 years old, following a pattern of missed developmental milestones and escalating emotional meltdowns, Leah was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Shortly after, a rare type of epilepsy was also identified. The first seizure struck without warning on Christmas Eve, just after midnight. One second she was sleeping peacefully, the next her small body went rigid and began to convulse in her mother's arms as Evan navigated the snow-covered streets, blinded by terror. That night altered their lives completely. Rachel Jensen, a financial analyst with a promising career, abandoned her professional path without a second thought. "My full-time job," she explained to Evan, "is to ensure Leah feels both safe and understood." She took on the roles of her daughter's advocate, therapist, and homeschool teacher, all in one. For 2 years, following a therapist's suggestion, Evan immersed himself in researching service animals. The path was long and arduous, involving writing grant proposals, filling out applications, and undergoing home evaluations. At last, they connected with a program that specialized in training seizure alert dogs for children with autism. This is how Bear entered their world. On the day they first met, Bear didn't overwhelm Leah or vie for her attention. He simply sat down. After 20 minutes of careful observation, Leah approached him and laid her small hand on his broad back. She leaned in and whispered a single word into his fur: "Mine." From that day forward, he was hers. Bear was not merely trained to sense the minute biochemical changes preceding a seizure. He was also Leah's shield against the world, her anchor in a world of overwhelming stimuli. He protected her from overwhelming crowds, used deep pressure to soothe her when her anxiety surged, and would lie across her legs to ground her when sensory input became too much. Yet here, at Gate C-19, the very being that provided Leah with a sense of security was being labeled a danger. For the Jensen family, this trip was more than a simple holiday. It represented a significant milestone, a confirmation that after years of therapy, meticulous planning, and numerous small triumphs, Leah was prepared to encounter something new and wondrous: Disney World. They had spent more than 18 months in preparation. Evan, always the gifted narrator, had designed detailed social narratives, photo albums that guided Leia through each stage of the trip, from the airport security line to shaking hands with Mickey Mouse. Rachel had devoted late nights to researching sensory-aware attractions, designated quiet areas, and gluten-free menus that would not overwhelm her daughter. Every single detail had been considered. For weeks, Leia had treasured a worn Disney guide book, carrying it everywhere. She would show Bear pictures of Cinderella's castle and murmur, "We will fly up high, and then we'll see the castle." This was about more than just excitement. It was about trust. It was trust in the established routine, trust that Bear would remain by her side, and trust that she would be kept safe. On the morning of their departure, the Jensens were up before sunrise. Leia was dressed in her favorite lavender hoodie, her softest noise-canceling headphones in place. Bear wore his blue service vest, his ID tags fastened securely to his collar. They had rehearsed every step repeatedly, using elevators at the mall, standing in grocery store lines, riding escalators, and enduring noisy environments, all to make this day feel as normal as possible. The car ride to O'Hare was quiet yet peaceful. In the back, Leia sat next to Bear, her hand resting on his back as she studied the guidebook on her lap. "We're prepared," Evan said to Rachel as he pulled into the long-term parking garage. "We've done all the right things." Rachel gave a nod, though her hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her seatbelt. What they could not have planned for, what no social story could ever predict, was the uniformed man waiting for them at Gate C-19, poised to destroy the delicate trust they had painstakingly built. To the onlookers at Gate C-19, Captain Alan Reynolds seemed composed, authoritative, and maybe even uncaring. Internally, however, a visceral reaction churned in his chest the instant he saw Bear. The heavy weight of a memory flooded back, unbidden. It was 7 years ago, but the incident replayed with horrifying clarity: a sun-drenched backyard in Phoenix, the sound of children's laughter, a sudden flash of fur, and then screams. His son Tyler, who was only 10 at the time, had been at a neighbor's house when their German shepherd attacked without provocation. Tyler's face bore the brunt of it: 63 stitches, multiple surgeries, and years of therapy. No amount of time could erase the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, or the more profound scars left within. Since that day, Reynolds had carried a silent, gnawing dread of large dogs, particularly German shepherds. He never spoke of it. A man in his position did not admit to fear. He sublimated it into a strict adherence to rules, order, and procedure. But on this day, that fear had emerged, raw and unfiltered. Bear was not the same dog that had mauled his son, but the similarity was enough for fear to supplant reason. In Reynolds's mind, a large dog on an airplane was a risk. He rationalized that his decision was about safety and maintaining control. The truth, however, a truth he had not yet confronted, was that the sight of Bear didn't bring airline safety regulations to mind. It made him see his son, screaming and bleeding on a hot summer lawn. And so, when confronted with Leia's quiet, steadfast protector, Alan Reynolds could only perceive a threat. The collective murmur at Gate C-19 grew, the waiting passengers now more of a captive audience. Their gazes flickered between the uniformed pilot and the quiet family at the counter, a tableau of authority versus vulnerability. Captain Reynolds stood rigidly, arms folded across his chest. His voice retained its clipped, commanding tone, but the tension in his jaw was palpable. "This is not up for discussion," he stated. "My decision is final. That dog is not getting on my plane." Evan Jensen moved forward, positioning himself slightly between the captain and his daughter. "Captain," he reiterated, his voice firm, "Bear is not simply a dog. He is a trained medical service animal. He has alerted us to dozens of seizures before they began. He has flown on several other flights with 0 incidents." Beside him, Rachel presented a meticulously organized folder. "We have everything right here: his ADA certification, his complete training records, and his vaccination history. We have complied with every single policy." Reynolds refused to even glance at the documentation. "You could present me with every form in existence, and my answer would not change. The final call on who or what boards this aircraft rests with me." Bear remained pressed against Leia's leg, motionless, but the girl herself had begun to rock slightly back and forth. Rachel recognized it instantly, the initial sign of dysregulation. Leia's coping strategies were failing, She was beginning to shut down. Other passengers began to shift uncomfortably. More phones were raised to record the scene. Whispers circulated, a mix of confusion and irritation. One man commented, "Just book a different flight," just loudly enough for them to hear. Evan knelt down to his daughter's eye level. "It's all right, sweetheart. Bear is right here with you." But Leia's breathing was quickening, and a soft hum, barely perceptible at first, was growing into a low, distressed sound. Bear shifted closer, his weight applying a calming, grounding pressure against her thigh. Then it happened. Leia looked directly at Captain Reynolds, and with a voice that was shaky but clear, she asked, "Why do you want to hurt me?" Her question hung in the air, silencing the space. Reynolds flinched as if struck, his mouth falling open, but no words came out. The entire terminal seemed to collectively hold its breath. Even the most cynical passengers looked away. No regulation, no rank, no policy manual held an answer for that. Because when a child asks you why you are hurting them, you have a choice. You either remain the source of their pain, or you become the person who makes it right. Then, Bear's demeanor changed subtly. His posture shifted, his ears pricked forward, and his nose nudged Leia's leg. Rachel's heart sank. "Evan," she whispered, a note of panic in her voice. "He's alerting." Evan immediately turned to his daughter. Her humming had intensified, almost becoming a moan. Her eyes had lost their focus, and her lips were slightly agape. "She's about to have a seizure," Evan said urgently. "We need room." Captain Reynolds took an instinctive step back. "Wait, what is happening?" "Bear is trained to detect seizures before they fully manifest," Rachel explained, now kneeling by her daughter's side. "We probably have less than 2 minutes." The gate agent, looking stunned, spoke into the intercom. "Please clear the area immediately surrounding Gate C-19. We have a medical emergency." Passengers quickly moved back, creating a wide circle. Some clutched their luggage, while others just watched, their phones now lowered. A few people reached for tissues. Bear instantly lay down, positioning himself across Leia's legs to form a gentle brace. He carefully adjusted his weight, applying a deep, constant pressure, his head resting against her chest. Rachel retrieved a small vial from her bag, rescue medication. Evan unzipped Leia's backpack, pulling out a soft travel pillow to place gently under her head. Captain Reynolds remained frozen in place, observing as Bear performed his duties with a calm precision that spoke of training, not instinct. This was not a pet's reaction. This was a professional at work. Then, in an unexpected move, Reynolds took off his uniform jacket and knelt. "Use this," he offered quietly to Evan, for her head. Leia's body stiffened and then began to tremble with rhythmic convulsions. Bear held his position, simply adjusting his body to absorb the movements with quiet strength, protecting her from injury. The passengers watched in a kind of reverent hush. The only sounds were Leia's labored breathing, Bear's steady presence, and the quiet, practiced movements of two parents navigating a crisis they knew all too well. By the time the seizure passed, Leia was curled up against Bear's side, her fingers intertwined in his fur. Her breathing was shallow but regular. Captain Reynolds stayed kneeling a moment longer, his eyes fixed on the dog that had just provided a level of care that no flight crew, policy, or procedure could ever match. He was no longer seeing a menace, but a savior. 15 minutes after the seizure, a subdued silence had settled over the gate. The passengers kept their distance, their expressions now more somber than annoyed. They had been party to something profound, something they would not easily forget. Captain Reynolds stood near the boarding entrance, his uniform jacket, now creased and bearing a faint mark from Leia's tears, folded over his arm. He stepped forward, his eyes sweeping over the crowd before coming to rest on the family still gathered on the floor. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice now devoid of its earlier sharpness, "I'd like to thank you all for your patience." He shifted his stance slightly, ensuring his words were heard by both the crowd and the Jensens. "We will commence boarding shortly, but I need to make one thing absolutely clear. Bear will be flying with us today." A wave of soft applause rippled through the gate area, not from everyone, but from a significant number. Reynolds went on, his voice steady but low. "As the captain of this aircraft, my primary duty is, and always will be, safety. Today, however, I was reminded that safety can take forms we don't anticipate." He paused, then continued. "Sometimes, The most effective safety measure has 4 paws, a steady heartbeat, and more bravery than most people possess. Rachel Jensen let out a shaky breath. Evan nodded, relief washing over his features. Reynolds walked toward them and knelt beside Leia, who was now resting quietly against Bear. She didn't speak, but she met his gaze. Really met it. I was scared too, Reynolds said softly, as if finally answering the question she had posed before her seizure. And I was wrong. He rose to his feet and added, once we reach cruising altitude, if you feel up to it, I would be honored to give you a tour of the cockpit. I have a feeling Bear would enjoy it as well. And for the first time that day, a small, weary smile touched Leia's lips. Just as Rachel was reaching for Leia's backpack to start getting ready for boarding, a sharp voice interrupted the moment. Excuse me. A man in an expensive Navy suit, flanked by 2 other airline employees, was approaching the gate counter. He was in his mid-50s, with a polished air that suggested he was used to having the final say. Gregory Fields. He introduced himself crisply, Regional Director of Operations. Captain Reynolds' expression hardened. The situation has been handled, he stated flatly. The service animal is cleared for travel. Yes, I was informed, Fields replied, tapping on a tablet. However, following several passenger complaints, concerns regarding a large dog on the flight, and particularly after a public medical incident at the gate, we are now reassessing the overall risk profile. Rachel stood up. Are you telling us that we're being denied boarding? Not at all, Fields said with practiced smoothness. You are more than welcome to fly, but the animal is not. We would be happy to rebook your family on a later flight once alternative arrangements for the dog have been made. The words were like a physical blow. Leia, already drained from the seizure, clutched Bear's fur tighter. Her breathing began to quicken again. She couldn't grasp every word, but she understood the meaning. They wanted to take Bear from her. No, she whispered. No, Bear, please. Fields paid her almost no attention. Reynolds stepped forward. You are countermanding a captain's on-site safety assessment. I am protecting the airline from potential liability, Fields shot back. It was then that a new voice called out from the terminal concourse. Dad. Everyone turned. Approaching them was a teenage boy with his own service animal, a golden Labrador named Toby. Beside him walked a poised woman in a blazer and heels. Reynolds blinked in disbelief. Tyler, his wife, Elizabeth Reynolds, joined them. Her tone was calm but unyielding. I also happen to be this airline's chief operating officer, she said. And this discussion is over. Gregory Fields went pale. Elizabeth knelt near Leia, keeping a respectful distance. You must be Leia, she said warmly. And this must be Bear. He is doing a remarkable job. Leia nodded, her voice small but audible. He keeps me safe. Elizabeth looked up at Fields and stated what no policy manual ever could. Then he flies. Not as a passenger, as a protector. The flight to Orlando was uneventful. Leia slept quietly in the bulkhead row, Bear curled loyally at her feet. There was no barking, no disturbance, just the reassuring presence of a dog fulfilling his duty. After they landed, the Jensens were invited into the cockpit. Captain Reynolds was there, his voice much gentler now. Welcome aboard, co-pilot, he said, handing Leia a small pin with wings. She smiled as she gazed at all the buttons and flashing lights. Then, she reached into her backpack and took out a folded sheet of paper. It was a drawing of an airplane in the sky with 4 figures standing below it. Her mom, her dad, Captain Reynolds, and herself, with Bear right in the center, wearing a superhero cape. Above the scene, she had written, Everyone is safe together. Reynolds accepted the drawing with a quiet sense of reverence. I'm going to keep this, he said, right where I can always see it. Later that week, the drawing was framed and hung in his office, right next to a photograph of Tyler and his service dog, Toby. 2 children, 2 dogs, each helping the other to heal, and each serving as a reminder to the adults around them of what real courage looks like. It was a reminder that sometimes the most significant journeys are not the ones measured in miles, but in moments of understanding at a departure gate.